The optimism that most children are born with, the joy of learning, the joy of playing, the joy of simply living, is gradually diminished for many pupils if they sense that however much they try to get good enough in school, they don't succeed with it. Boredom is viewed as a negative emotion that's unpleasant by definition, and that's mildly stressing in the sense that it's telling you to stop wasting your resources or your life and do something. So it's very important to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy boredom, much in the same way as we distinguish between healthy and unhealthy stress.
How can learning be done in ways that are sufficiently intrinsically motivating so as not to undermine further interest in it? And how can this be translated into the educational institution? These are questions faced by many educators today. Having spent the last 15 years researching and teaching in the field of positive psychology, Professor Henrik Knoop offers unique insights into these challenges.
Like every other emotion, boredom is important, and like every other negative emotion that tells you to do something and prompts you to change something which is important for you, boredom is also important to sense. So in that sense, it's healthy to feel your feelings or your emotions and to react to them. So when boredom is short-lived, short-term and moderate, it's just wonderful as an inspirational force for all kinds of creativity in life. The problem occurs when it becomes long-term and starts to become depressing and starts to build up all kinds of related consequences like health issues, motivational issues, issues of meaning, and so on.
As a trained educational psychologist, Professor Knoop, an extraordinary professor in Optentia, visited the focus area recently to share his experience and knowledge with researchers at the Northwest University.
I was showing a graph of pupils from 4th to 9th grade in public schools, where you could see that every year more students were often or very often bored during class. And the reason for that are multiple. And it's important to understand that in many schools this is not the case. So even though it's a trend, there are ways locally to actually avoid this happening, which of course makes for great optimism. But when it happens, it's typically because the pupils feel less empowered, they're less able to take action when they sense boredom. It often because there's a social factor involved in that, so not doing good in school, which you are likely to when you are bored, becomes more and more socially humiliating as you get more and more aware of social comparison, which really damages the culture of a school. It's also because the school often has a physical environment that's quite boring to be in. If you don't have a pedagogy that's exploratory and where you can really be creative. So if you have a very standardized teaching where everything is predictable and you know exactly what's going to happen and there's no surprise to be expected anywhere, then of course the more aware you become of that as you grow older, the more daunting it becomes. So that'll be part of the explanation. Also, the optimism that most children are born with, the joy of learning, the joy of playing, the joy of simply living and becoming more skilled when they are small, is gradually diminished for many pupils if they sense that however much they try to get good enough in school, they don't succeed with it. So that's disempowering, that's demotivating for many pupils, and is really a symptom not just of unpleasantness on the student behalf, but also of almost every educational ideal being undermined, because this high level of boredom typically correlates with low academic performance, low social inclusiveness, low motivation, low health status, and so on. This is wonderful insight that everybody knows when they hear about it, namely that when children play, they automatically learn that you have to make an effort in order to be in the play, in the zone. If you do sloppy work, you'll just get out of the play, your universe disappears. So having the sense of playfulness and the sense of having to make an effort are two sides of the same experience, which is, if not a peak experience, certainly a flow experience often, which really is worth living for in itself. And because children play by nature like every other mammal on the planet, when they're young, they all learn by repeated experience, convincing experience, that if you want to have a good play, you have to make an effort, and it's no fun not to try to do your best. And that fantastic combination of making an effort and having a good time should of course inform every educational aspiration later on, because that provides for sustainable, psychologically sustainable educational practice, and it will predict that pupils don't burn out, don't get tired of learning, because as everybody knows, and many of these studies show, it's much worse not to learn than to learn. First of all, understand that this is not a blaming game. This is not something the teacher can deal with him or herself. It's not only the student's faults, and it's not only the administration and the government. It's a collective enterprise. It's a systemic problem that has 200-year roots in many countries. So it can be difficult to change. Once we understand that we have a common interest in that, the teacher can be a key person in creating a culture around that shared sense, and invite the pupils to be active and responsible participants in that. Is to say that maybe, dear students, you think that this class is boring, and that's important because you would learn much more. It was exciting. So how can we make it more exciting? What can you do? What can I do? Should we have another room, or should we make more differentiated teaching, or how could we do this? I think my main advice would be to understand that the key to all successful education is that you maintain the joy of learning. If that is destroyed, compromised, the educational process is compromised, and every educational ideal is more or less undermined by it. So the joy of learning, also in a sense, if you learn difficult stuff or stuff that irritates you, and so you should maintain the joy of being curious and really trying to pursue deeper understanding throughout life. So that's one thing. And you should promote a culture where the joy of learning is mandatory, not mandatory, but almost mandatory component of all education, because it's important for the future of society and for the present. My second recommendation would be to primarily focus on the quality of the process of learning, and secondarily on the result. Because if you focus on the process and make sure that the process of learning is a life worth living in itself, is something that is motivating in itself, pupils will get an experience of life where they actually develop more optimism and more interest and motivation for all kinds of good things in life. And the likelihood that their results of their effort will be optimized are as high as it will ever be. So by giving priority to good educational processes rather than the output as a primary thing, you don't compromise the output, you actually strengthen the likelihood that the output will be high, because you make sure that you don't demotivate anybody in the process. Whenever you do that, it will reflect in the output also.